She drove over my crops with her Mercedes, so I lifted her car onto a pole. HOA, President Maggie Whitfield ploughed through my tomato garden, crushing 20 plants. While laughing about neighborhood standards, she demanded $50,000 in fines and thought I'd just roll over dead wrong. By the end of that week, her precious Mercedes was spinning 15 FT in the air, and the whole thing went viral. If you're dealing with HOA bullies, wherever you're watching from, drop a comment below. This is the wildest revenge story you'll hear today, and every single word is true. My name is Marcus Hayes, and I'm just a regular accountant who inherited a small 2-acre ranch from my mother when she passed away 2 years ago every morning before heading to my cubicle. At Peterson Logistics, I'd spend an hour in the garden she left behind. It wasn't much to look at from the outside, just rows of tomatoes, cabbage and corn surrounded by the manicured lawns of Pinewood Heights. But to me, it was everything Mum used. To say a tomato garden is enough to make a home. And I'd found that letter in her things just last week, yellowed with age but still smelling faintly of her lavender perfume. I was sitting there that morning reading her words again when I noticed something odd in the distance. A new billboard had gone up overnight at the entrance to our subdivision, and though I couldn't make out all the words from where I sat, future development coming soon was clear enough to send a chill down my spine. That afternoon changed everything. I came home from work to find a white Mercedes S-Class parked right in the middle of my tomato plants, not beside them, not near them, but literally crushing 20 plants under its wheels. The red juice from the destroyed tomatoes looked like blood on the soil, and I felt my heart crack as I surveyed the damage. Then she emerged from the car like some kind of suburban villain in a hot pink blazer and oversized sunglasses. Margaret Whitfield, president of the Pinewood Heights Homeowners Association, stepped carefully around the destruction she'd caused. Her lips pursed in disgust, as if my garden was contaminating her designer's shoes. "Oh, it's you, Marcus," she said, waving her manicured hand dismissively at the carnage. "I needed to speak with you about this situation. You just destroyed 20 tomato plants," I said, trying to keep my voice steady even though rage was boiling in my chest. "Those were heirloom varieties my mother planted." Maggie actually laughed at my pain plants. "These are weeds," Marcus eyes, sores, which brings me to why I'm here. She pulled out a manila folder thick with papers and waved it in my face. "This agricultural disaster of yours violates 17 HOA bylaws. 17, the smell alone, drops property values by 10% according to my research." I stared at her, unable to believe what I was hearing. "You drove through my garden to tell me it smells." Her smile turned predatory. "I drove through your garden because this is communal property according to HOA interpretation. Everything within 20 FT of the main road belongs to the Association for Emergency Access. Didn't you read the 500-page covenant when you inherited this place?" The way she said "inherited" made it sound like a disease. "This is private property," I said firmly. "My mother owned this land for 30 years before your HOA even existed." Maggie's face flushed red, clashing horribly with her pink blazer. "Your mother is gone, Marcus, and her little victory garden is going with her. You have 30 days to clear all this." She gestured wildly at my crops or face fines of $50. "000, yes, you heard that right. $50,000 the board voted unanimously last night." She turned to leave, then paused for dramatic effect. "You know, Marcus, I tried to be nice about this, I really did, but you people never learn. Rules are rules." She climbed back into her Mercedes, started the engine, and deliberately reversed over another row of plants before driving off, leaving deep tire tracks in the soil my mother had tended for decades. I stood there among the destroyed plants, feeling like someone had reached into my chest and squeezed my heart. The tomatoes weren't just plants, they were 3 months of weekend work. My only joy, after long days of spreadsheets and corporate meetings. More importantly, they were my last living connection too. Mom, I knelt down and picked up a crushed tomato, its seeds spilling onto my palm. The familiar smell of tomato leaves filled my nostrils, the same scent that used to cling to Mom's clothes when she came in from gardening for a moment. I nearly gave.
Up right there, 50.
Our zero was more than I made in a year, but then I remembered something Mom used to say, baby bullies only win when good people stay quiet. I stood up, brushed the dirt off my knees and headed inside to dig through the old files Mom had kept in her desk. That's when I found it buried under decades of tax returns and Christmas cards was a document that made my hands shake. It was dated 1987, stamped with the official seal of the State Agricultural Department. The words "protected agricultural land" jumped out at me like a lifeline. According to this paper, our 2 acres were designated as a historical agricultural preserve, protected from development or HOA interference in per. My mother, God bless her, had fought this battle before and won, but as I stared at the document, I heard car doors slamming outside. Through the window, I saw 2 more HOA board members taking photos of my garden, measuring distances and shaking their heads disapprovingly. I found something in Mom's old papers. 3 words that could destroy Maggie's entire plan: protected agricultural land. But first, I had to survive what she'd do next the next morning. I woke up with a plan. If Maggie wanted to play hardball, I'd kill her with kindness. First, I spent my entire Saturday harvesting the surviving tomatoes, washing them until they gleamed, and arranging them in pretty baskets I'd bought from the craft store. Then I went door to door through Pinewood Heights, introducing myself properly to neighbors I'd only waved at before. "Hi, I'm Marcus from the ranch at the end of the street," I'd say with my biggest smile. "I brought you some organic heirloom tomatoes from my garden. They make incredible salsa." The responses surprised me more than Maggie's attack had. Behind nearly every door was someone with their own HOA horror story. Bill Patterson, a Vietnam veteran in his 70s, accepted the tomatoes with tears in his eyes. That woman fined me $500 because my American flag was at 88 degrees instead of 90, he said, his voice shaking with suppressed rage. I measured it myself after. She left 1880 1 degree off, and she took my whole Social Security check. Lisa Chen, a single mom with twin boys, invited me in for coffee and showed me a stack of violation notices, chalk drawings on the sidewalk. She said bitterly, "My boys drew hopscotch squares," and she fined me for defacing HOA property. Then she tried to ban them from the playground because they were too loud. They're 7 years old. By the time I reached the 10th house, I realized Maggie had terrorized everyone in Pinewood Heights. But what shocked me most was the fear in their voices. They whispered her name like she might hear them through the walls. When I got home Sunday afternoon, I understood why everyone was so scared. A massive sign, at least 8 feet tall, had been planted. In my garden, overnight violation zone, NOAA enforcement in progress. It screamed in red letters. But that wasn't the worst part. A construction crew was building a concrete wall along my property line, right where my only access road met the street. The wall was already 4 FT high and growing. "Hey!" I shouted, running toward them. "What are you doing? This is my property." An older foreman looked at me sympathetically, but kept directing his crew. "Sorry, sir. HOA orders. Mrs. Whitfield says this is a visual pollution barrier to protect the neighborhood from your farm. Smell all legal and proper." She showed us the permits. I pulled out my phone to call the police, but the foreman shook his head. Won't do any good. Officer Rodriguez already came by and said, it's a civil matter. HOA has jurisdiction. By Monday morning, the wall was 6 feet high and completely blocked my driveway. I'd have to walk half a mile around to reach the main road. But my neighbor Tom Bradley, a mechanic with a garage full of strange equipment, knocked on my door with a gleam in his eye. Marcus, I've been waiting 5 years for someone to stand up to that witch, he said, his grey beard twitching with suppressed laughter. How do you feel about zip lines? I stared at him. Zip lines, he nodded enthusiastically. I've got 800 FT of aircraft cable from a job. We string it from your roof to that oak tree past the wall, and you can zip right over her stupid barrier. Technically, there's no HOA rule against aerial transportation because nobody ever thought to make one the absolute. Insanity of the suggestion made me laugh for the first time in days. You're serious? Tom's grin widened. Dead serious. Let's give Maggie something to really lose her mind about. We worked through the night, and by Tuesday morning I had my own personal zip line stretching from my house over the wall. I'll never forget the look on my co-workers' faces when I explained why I was 15 minutes late. You zipline to work? My boss asked, blinking in confusion. In your suit? But the real payoff came. That afternoon, when Maggie arrived to inspect her wall, I was ready, standing on my roof platform, in my full business attire, briefcase in hand. As her Mercedes pulled up, I clipped onto the zipline and sailed over her wall, my tie flapping in the wind like a flag of rebellion. The small crowd of neighbors that had gathered burst into applause by the time I landed gracefully on the other side. Maggie's face had turned purple. She ripped her own violation zone sign out of the ground and tore it in half with her bare hands. You think you're smarter than me, she screamed, her voice echoing across the neighborhood. I destroy you. Do you hear me? Destroy you. Rules are rules, and I make the rules. The crowd fell silent at her outburst. This wasn't the controlled, calculating HOA president. They knew this was someone coming unhinged. She grabbed her phone and started barking orders. Yes, I need the locks changed on every community facility. Hayes is banned from the mailbox cluster, the walking trails, everything. Cut his water line if you have to. Linda Martinez, the new lawyer who'd moved in last month, stepped forward. Actually, Maggie, that would be illegal. You can't deny basic services, Maggie. Spun around so fast her sunglasses flew off. Are you challenging me? Are you? But before Linda could respond, my phone buzzed. The text was from an unknown number. Check Maggie's financial records. You're not her first victim. Look at what happened to the new family, the Johnsons and 5 others. She's stealing from all of us. My blood ran cold as I read the message again. Someone was watching someone who knew her secrets, and apparently I wasn't fighting this battle alone. The anonymous text made my blood run cold. Check Maggie's financial records. You're not her first victim. Someone was watching, someone who knew her secret. Linda Martinez turned out to be exactly the ally I needed as a lawyer who specialized in property law. She had the legal right to request HOA financial records. And after my anonymous tip, she was more than willing to help. I've been suspicious since I moved here, she told me. Over coffee at her dining room table, legal documents spread between us. The HOA fees are triple what my last neighborhood charged. But we have no amenities, no pool, no gym, no landscaping, service. Where does the money go? We decided to visit the HOA office together, armed with official requests and determination. But first, I needed to figure out who mysterious informant was. The text had mentioned specific families, people who had left Pinewood Heights. Suddenly, over the past few years, I remembered the guys vaguely. They'd had a beautiful vegetable garden too until one day they just vanished and their house went up for sale. The HOA office was located in a converted mansion at the center of Pinewood Heights, renovated to the point of absurdity. Italian marble floors, crystal chandeliers and furniture that looked like it belonged in a palace, not a neighborhood association office. As we walked in, a young woman with bright red glasses looked up from her desk nervously. Her nameplate read Sarah Evans, Administrative Assistant, and her hands shook slightly as she recognized us. "Mr. Hayes, Miss Martinez," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mrs. Whitfield isn't here right now." Linda stepped forward with our paperwork. "That's fine, we're here to review financial records. This is a formal request under state law you're required to provide them." Sarah's face went pale, but she nodded and led us to a back room filled with filing cabinets. "Everything from the last 5 years is here," she said, then glanced around nervously before adding in an even quieter voice, "File cabinet B, drawer 3, start there." As soon as she left, Linda and I exchanged glances. "That was oddly specific," Linda murmured, but we went straight to the B suggested location. What we found made my garden destruction seem like child's play. The evidence was all there in black and white. Maggie Whitfield had stolen $500,000 from the HOA over 5 years, the Mercedes she drove purchased with HOA funds as a community inspection vehicle. Her trips to Hawaii, Las Vegas, and the Bahamas all filed as HOA leadership conferences that never existed. The office renovation billed at $200, $000 when the actual work cost may be $20,000. But the worst part was a folder labeled Enforcement Actions. Successful property acquisitions inside were detailed plans for forcing out homeowners who resisted her authority. The Wind family's garden had been poisoned. The Johnsons had their home insurance mysteriously cancelled. 5 other families had faced escalating fines and harassment until they sold their homes for below-market value to companies that, after some digging, all traced back to Maggie's relatives. "This is insane," Linda breathed, taking photos of everything with her phone. "She's running a criminal enterprise disguised as a HOA. We were so absorbed in the documents that we didn't hear the door open behind us, finding everything you need." Sarah stood in the doorway, and I tensed, expecting her to call security instead. She stepped inside and closed the door behind her. "I sent you that text," she said quietly. "I've worked here for 2 years watching her destroy families, and I couldn't take it anymore. Last month, she ordered me to forge signatures on fake violation notices when I refused. She said she'd make sure I never worked in this town again. She's done it before." Sarah pulled out her phone and showed us a recording app. "I've been documenting everything, every threat, every illegal order, every family she's targeted. But I was too scared to do anything alone." She looked at me with tears in her eyes when I saw what she did to your garden. "How you fought back with that zip line. I thought maybe finally someone could stop her. But Maggie was already 2 steps ahead of us. When I got home that evening, my entire garden was dead. Not just damaged, completely destroyed. The irrigation system had been sabotaged, and the water tank had been filled with industrial-strength herbicide. The smell hit me before I even saw the damage, a chemical stench that burned my nostrils. Every plant was brown and withering, the soil poisoned beyond recovery. I fell to my knees in the middle of what had been my mother's heirloom tomato patch, now just dead earth that would grow nothing for years. The chemical smell made me gag as I touched the poisoned soil, feeling its gritty, lifeless texture. This earth had been rich and dark just yesterday, full of worms and life. Now it felt like ash between my fingers. I thought about Mum's hands in this same dirt planting seeds every spring. humming old gospel songs while she worked. She'd spent 30 years building this soil, adding compost and love. In equal measure, 3 generations of tomatoes had grown here, fed our neighbors, connected us to the land. Now it would take decades to heal. If it ever could, I picked up a handful of the dead earth and let it fall through my fingers like sand. Each grain, a memory destroyed. The weight of it all crashed down on me. This wasn't just about plants anymore. This was about a woman who would stop at nothing to maintain her power, who had destroyed families and livelihoods without a second thought. I sat there in the poisoned garden as the sun set, seriously considering giving up. What was the point of fighting someone with no conscience? No limits? That's when Sarah appeared at my gate holding a small, potted plant. "I saved this last week," she said softly, handing me a tiny tomato seedling. "I had a feeling she might do something like this. It's from your mother's garden. I thought maybe you'd want to keep at least one alive." I looked at that small plant, its leaves still green and healthy, reaching toward the dying sun. My mother's legacy reduced to a single seedling, but still alive, still fighting. I stood up, brushing poisoned dirt from my knees, and made a decision. Maggie Whitfield had just made the biggest mistake of her life, because now she'd given me nothing left to lose. "Sarah," I said, my voice steady despite the devastation around me, "how would you like to help me plan something special for Mrs. Whitfield, something involving that Mercedes she loves so much?" Sarah's shy smile transformed into something fierce. I thought, "You'd never ask, but first you should see this video I recorded yesterday. Maggie giving very specific instructions about poisoning your water system as I held the video evidence of Maggie's crimes." My phone buzzed. Unknown number. The voice was cold. "Drop this now or your garden will be the least of your losses." The line went dead. The plan came together faster than I expected. Tom Bradley proved to be a mechanical genius with connections throughout the construction industry, while Linda Martinez worked her legal magic to ensure we stayed just within the bounds of the law. The key was the 15 FT pole. By my ranch gate, a remnant from the property's days as an actual working ranch. According to historical records Linda dug up, it was registered as a historical agricultural marker and could be used to display anything related to the property's farming heritage, including, Linda said with a wicked grin, any equipment or vehicles that represent threats to agricultural preservation. It's all about interpretation. Meanwhile, Sarah Evans fed us inside information from the HOA office. Maggie was getting paranoid, demanding daily reports on my activities and calling emergency board meetings every night. She'd even hired a private investigator to follow me, though he gave up after day 3 of watching me do nothing but work and come home to my dead garden. The trap required patience and precise timing. Sarah's job was crucial. She had to convince Maggie that I was planning to expose the embezzlement to law enforcement. "Mrs. Whitfield," she said during a carefully rehearsed phone call that we recorded, "I just overheard Mr. Hayes on the phone with the FBI. He mentioned your name and something about financial crimes. He said they're coming to the office tomorrow at 2 p.m. The effect was immediate." Maggie's Mercedes screeched into my property 20 minutes later, tearing through what was left of my garden gate. She was driving like a mad woman, and I watched from my window as she deliberately aimed for the last surviving section of my mother's garden, the sunflower patch that had somehow escaped the poisoning. The sound of those tall flowers snapping under her tires was like bones breaking. She parked right in the middle of the destruction and jumped out, her face twisted with rage and panic. "Marcus!" she screamed. "Get out here right now!" I stepped out, slowly keeping my face neutral, even though inside I was electric with anticipation behind Maggie. I could see Tom's construction crew moving into position, hidden behind the barn. 20 neighbors had volunteered to help, including old Bill Patterson, who'd been waiting years for revenge over his flag fine. Even the quiet Mr. Wilson, who'd never said a word at any neighborhood meeting, had shown up with work gloves and a determined expression. "Hello, Maggie," I said. Calmly, destroying more of my property, she stalked toward me, her designer heels sinking into the soft earth. "Don't play games with me. I know what you're planning. You think you can send the feds after me. I own this neighborhood. I own the police chief's mortgage company. I own the mayor's favorite restaurant." Her confession was beautiful, and every word was being captured by the dozen phones recording from various windows and hiding spots. "Actually, Maggie," I said, stepping aside as Tom's crew emerged, "I haven't called anyone but you, just confessed to corruption in front of 40 witnesses, so thanks for that." The look of realization on her face was priceless, followed immediately by panic as she saw the construction crew surrounding her Mercedes with heavy chains. "What are you doing?" she shrieked, running back toward her car. But Tom had already secured the chains to the reinforced crane hook, and Bill Patterson stood by the controls with the biggest smile I'd ever seen on his weathered face. "This is kidnapping!" Maggie screamed, pounding on her car windows as the chains went taut. "This is assault. Theft, I'll sue your whole bloodline." But she'd made a crucial mistake. She'd left her keys in the ignition and the doors unlocked. In her panic, Sarah quickly grabbed them while Maggie was distracted, tossing them to me with a triumphant grin. The Mercedes rose slowly into the air, Maggie trapped inside as she'd locked herself in. During her panic, the crowd that had gathered gasped and then burst into spontaneous applause as the car rose higher and higher. "Going up," Tom announced cheerfully. "First floor, come up, and second." "Floor Justice, third floor, the best view in Pinewood Heights." Someone started live streaming, and within minutes, hundreds of viewers were watching Maggie Whitfield terror of the suburbs suspended in her illegally purchased Mercedes 15 effed in the air. The car rotated slowly in the breeze like the world's most expensive wind chime. "This is actually quite artistic," Linda mused, taking photos, a perfect representation of how HOA overreach leaves residents feeling powerless and trapped. "I might use this in my law review article." Maggie had gone from screaming to bargaining. Okay, I'll drop the fines. I'll leave your garden alone." But the crowd wasn't having it. "What about my flag?" "Fine," Bill shouted. "What about poisoning the Nwyn's garden?" Another neighbor called out. "What about stealing our money, Lisa?" Demanded. The police arrived 30 minutes later, led by Officer Rodriguez, who looked like he was trying very hard not to laugh. "Folks," he said, surveying the scene, "I'm going to need someone to explain why there's a Mercedes hanging from a pole." Linda stepped forward with a folder of documentation. "Officer, this vehicle is being displayed as part of a historical agricultural exhibition showing the contrast between sustainable farming and corporate greed. Also, the woman inside just confessed to embezzlement, corruption, and property destruction. We have it all on video." She handed him Sarah's phone with the recorded confession. Rodriguez watched for 30 seconds before his expression turned serious. "Mommy called up to Maggie. I'm going to need you to come down and answer some questions." It took another hour to lower the car and extract Maggie, who had gone from threats to tears. As Rodriguez led her away in handcuffs, she turned back one last time. "You haven't won," she hissed at me. "I'm just a small player. The people who really run things around here will crush you." From the patrol car, Maggie's letter arrived the next day. Through her lawyer, 4 words that chilled me to the bone: "You woke the dragon." That night, a black Bentley parked outside my house. The real war was just beginning. The Bentley belonged to Richard Thornton, though I didn't learn his name until he stepped out of the car. looking like money itself. Expensive suit, expensive shoes, expensive smile that never reached his cold grey eyes. He surveyed my destroyed garden with the calculating gaze of a predator, then walked up to me like he owned the ground beneath his feet. "Mr. Hayes," he said, his voice smooth as aged whiskey, "I believe we need to talk about your future." I stood my ground on my own porch, arms crossed, trying not to show how much his presence unsettled me. There was something fundamentally wrong about him, like a snake wearing human skin. "If you're here about Maggie?" She brought that on herself. I said. He laughed, a sound with no warmth in it. Maggie was an employee, an overzealous one perhaps, but she served her purpose. "No, I'm here about your land." He pulled out a tablet and showed me architectural plans that made my stomach drop. The entire neighborhood, including my 2 acres, had been mapped out for something called Thornton Grand Casino and Resort. My ranch sat dead center, where the main building would go $2 million, he said casually, like he was ordering coffee cash. "You can be gone by the weekend and start fresh, somewhere else, somewhere without all." These complications, I looked at the plans again, seeing not just my home, but the entire neighborhood transformed into a gambling paradise. "That's why the billboard?" I said, "Slowly the future development. You've been planning this for years." His smile widened, clever boy. "Yes, I've been acquiring property strategically. Your neighbors have been surprisingly easy to convince, especially after Maggie made their lives difficult. Amazing how a little pressure makes people eager to sell the casual cruelty." In his voice made my skin crawl. This wasn't just about my garden anymore. This was about a man who saw people's homes as squares on a game board. "I'm not selling," I said firmly. "This land is protected agricultural preserve. You can't build here anyway." Thornton's eyes narrowed. "Protected status can be changed with the right political connections, and I have all of them. The mayor dines at my table. The city council takes my calls. Even your precious Officer Rodriguez has a mortgage through one of my banks." He stepped closer, and I smelled expensive cologne mixed with something else, the sour scent of corruption. "Take the money, Mr. Hayes, because if you don't, things will get uncomfortable," asked the Gwynn family. "Oh, wait, you can't. They moved to another state after their house mysteriously burned down faulty wiring." The insurance company said the threat was clear, but before I could respond, a voice came from the shadows, still making threats. "Richard, some things never change." Dorothy Thompson emerged from behind my barn, and Thornton's composed mask slipped for just a second. "Dorothy," he said, recovering quickly, "I thought you moved away." She smiled, but it was all teeth and no warmth. "I did, but I came back to check on Margaret's boy. His mother saved my home 30 years ago when you tried your first land grab scheme. The pieces clicked into place. This wasn't Thornton's first attempt at stealing the neighborhood. You knew my mum?" I asked Dorothy. She nodded, never taking her eyes off. "Thornton, she organized the homeowners back in '92 when this snake tried to rezone everything commercial. We fought him off then, but he's been plotting revenge ever since." Maggie was just his latest weapon. Thornton's face had gone cold. "Ancient history. Dorothy, the world has changed. I own judges now, not just councilmen." He turned back to me. "You have 1 week to reconsider. After that, well, accidents happen, especially to people who live alone on isolated properties." He walked back to his Bentley, then paused. "Oh, and Mr. Hayes, your little stunt with Maggie made the news. My investors were very amused, but they don't like delays, and you're becoming a delay." As his car pulled away, Dorothy put a weathered hand on my shoulder. "Don't let him scare you, Marcus. Your mother didn't, and she had a lot less to work with than you do." Now that night I couldn't sleep. I sat in my kitchen, staring at the surviving tomato plant Sarah had saved, and tried to process everything. Thornton wasn't just some local bully, he was connected dangerous, and had been playing this game for decades. The notebook where I'd been documenting everything felt pitifully small against his kind of power around 3 I decided to water the little tomato plant and stepped outside. That's when I saw them. 3 men in dark clothes pouring something on what was left of my garden fence. The smell of kerosene hit me like a slap. "Hey!" I shouted, grabbing a shovel. One of them turned, and I saw the gas can in his hand. They were going to burn me out, just like the Nayans. I charged forward, swinging the shovel, and caught one of them in the shoulder. He went down, but the other 2 rushed me. The fight was brutal and quick. I managed to land a few hits, but they were professionals, just as one raised a crowbar to cave in my skull. A shotgun blast split the night air. Tom Bradley stood there in his bathrobe and boots, his hunting rifle pointed skyward. "Next." "One won't be a warning shot," he growled behind him. More neighbors emerged. Bill with his baseball bat, Linda already on the phone with state police. Even quiet Mr. Wilson holding a pitchfork, like he meant business. The arsonists fled, leaving behind their gas cans and one very important thing. A wallet that had fallen during the scuffle. Inside was a business card for Pinnacle Security Services, a subsidiary of Thornton Enterprises. "We got him," Linda breathed. "This is attempted arson assault. Conspiracy with Maggie's testimony about him being the mastermind. We can take him down." But as dawn broke over my scorched but still standing property, I knew it wouldn't be that easy. Thornton had been doing this for 30 years. He had judges, cops, politicians. We needed something bigger than just evidence. We needed to expose him completely, publicly, in a way he couldn't buy his way out of. Dorothy appeared at my elbow with a cup of coffee and a mysterious smile. "You know," she said, conversationally, "Richard's having a big fundraiser tomorrow night, $500 a plate, all the city's power. Players attending would be a shame if someone crashed it with evidence of his crimes." She winked and walked away, leaving me staring after her. The message Thornton had burned into my lawn was still visible in the morning light. Sell or burn, but Dorothy whispered something that changed everything. I have 30 years of his crimes on. Video ready to fight back. The Thornton fundraiser was being held at his estate on the hill overlooking Pinewood Heights, a monument to excess that made Maggie's HOA office look modest. Sarah volunteered to go in as catering staff using her connections from a previous job to get hired for the night. They need extra servers for an event this big. She explained, her red glasses replaced with contact lenses for disguise. "I can get you in through the service entrance, but after that you're on your own." Tom had spent the day preparing our technical surprise with the help of his construction crew. The sprinkler system was installed by my cousin's company, he said, with a grin. "We still got the override codes. When you give the signal, every guest at that party is getting a shower they'll never forget." The plan was simple in concept, but required perfect timing. Dorothy's 30 years of video evidence had been edited into a devastating 10-minute presentation showing Thornton's pattern of harassment, arson, and intimidation. Linda had prepared legal documents ready to file the moment we had public witnesses to his crime, but first we had to get in and take control of the party. I dressed in my best suit, the one I'd worn to Mom's funeral, and met Sarah at the service entrance at 7 Kitty P. The place was crawling with security, but they were focused on the front where luxury cars were dropping off the city's elite. Sarah handed me a server's apron and tray. "Keep your head down until we get to the main hall," she whispered. "I've already plugged our USB into the main presentation system. When Thornton starts his speech at 8:30, his investors are going to see a very different show than planned." We moved through the kitchen, past hundreds of champagne glasses and appetizers that cost more than most people's weekly groceries. The main hall was spectacular. In the worst way, crystal chandeliers, gold fixtures, and a massive screen behind the podium showing rolling images of Thornton's various developments. The mayor was there, laughing with City Councilman Police Chief Brennan. Clinket glasses with Judge Harrison. It was a who's who of everyone who was supposed to protect regular citizens but had sold out instead. Thornton himself stood at the center like a spider in his web, shaking hands and making promises when he saw me carrying a tray of drinks. His eyes narrowed for a moment before dismissing me as just another servant. That's when I spotted it. The centerpiece of my revenge, on a raised platform, sat a pristine tomato plant in an ornate pot. Part of their farm-to-table theme decorations. The irony was perfect. I made my way over to it, and as I passed, I dropped a small card that read, "This tomato represents every garden destroyed, every family displaced, every dream crushed for profit, but memories, like plants, can grow back stronger." By 8:25, everyone was pleasantly drunk and ready for Thornton's big announcement. He took the podium with practiced confidence, tapping the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining me tonight. What I'm about to show you will transform not just Pinewood Heights, but the entire county, a development that will bring thousands of jobs and millions in revenue." He clicked his remote and the screen came to life, but instead of architectural plans, the first image was security footage from 1992 showing a younger Thornton directing men to burn down a house. Dorothy's voice narrated, "This is Richard Thornton ordering the arson of my home because I refused to sell. The fire department ruled it an accident, but I kept recording." The room froze. Thornton clicked frantically at his remote, but the presentation continued. Video after video showed his crimes, bribing officials, threatening families, and most damningly, a recent clip of him in his study saying, "Once Hayes is gone, we own the whole neighborhood. If he won't sell, we'll burn him out like the others." Maggie takes the fall. If anyone asks, the mayor's face went white. The police chief stepped back from Thornton like he was radioactive. That's when I gave Tom the signal. The sprinkler system activated. But instead of water, it sprayed black-dyed water mixed with organic fertilizer, the same mix Thornton's men had used to poison gardens over the years, just with harmless coloring instead of herbicide. The effect was chaos. 500 of the city's most powerful people ran screaming as Blackwater rained down, ruining designer clothes and perfect makeup. "Turn it off," Thornton roared, slipping in the growing puddles. He tried to run for the exit, but slipped, crashing into the dessert table and covering himself in chocolate mousse. The screen kept playing, now showing financial records. Sarah had pulled from his office $200 million in insurance fraud. Linda's voice announced over the speakers, $50 million in embezzled city funds, 5 confirmed arsons, and 12 families forced from their home. She stood by the main exit with state police officers handing out arrest warrants as people fled. "Richard Thornton, you're under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, arson, and racketeering. And thanks to this room full of witnesses, you can't buy your way out." But Thornton had one last card to play. As the officers approached, he laughed, a horrible sound that cut through the chaos. "You think I'm alone? I'm just one of 12 regional directors. Paradise Corp owns this whole state. You've won nothing." Sarah stepped out from behind the curtain, no longer the timid secretary, but someone who'd found her strength. She pulled off her glasses and faced him directly. "Actually, Mr. Thornton, we know about Paradise Corp. Every name, every connection, every crime. See, when you hired me to work for Maggie, you didn't check my background very carefully. My real name is Sarah Park. You destroyed my parents' restaurant in 2015 with a fake health code violation. I've been collecting evidence ever since she held up a hard drive 3 years of emails, recordings, and documents. Your entire network is finished, as the police dragged Thornton away, still screaming. About lawyers and connections, I stood in the middle of the ruined party and felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope the tomato plant on its platform stood untouched by the chaos, still green and growing. Despite everything, Dorothy appeared. At my side, soaking wet but smiling. "Your mother would be so proud," she said, as cops dragged Thornton away. He laughed. "You think you won, I'm just one of 12. The others are coming." But this time, we'd be ready. The tomato resistance had just begun. 6 months later, I stood in the middle of what was now Pinewood Community Farm, watching the sunrise paint the fields gold. What had started as my desperate fight to save 2 acres had grown into 50 acres of community-owned land, purchased with the settlement money from the class action lawsuit against Thornton Enterp. The morning air smelled of fresh earth and growing things, a far cry from the poisoned wasteland Maggie had left behind. I was watering the tomato plants in the memorial garden when car doors started slamming in the parking lot. Saturday mornings had become something special here, with families arriving early to tend their plots or pick up fresh produce from our farm stand. But today was different. Today was the grand opening celebration, and over 300 people were expected. I smiled, remembering how this all started with 20 crushed tomato plants and 1 angry woman in a pink blazer. Linda Martinez arrived first, carrying boxes of legal documents. "Morning, Marcus," she called out cheerfully. "Just finalizing the last of the conservation easements. This land can never be developed now, no matter who tries to buy it." She'd become our pro bono legal counsel, helping establish the farm as a protected agricultural space in perpetuity. Behind her came Sarah, no longer hiding behind red glasses, but wearing contacts and a confident smile. She'd transformed from a terrified secretary into our education director, teaching kids about sustainable farming and food justice. "The school groups are so excited about the new greenhouse," she said, practically bouncing with enthusiasm. "We have field trips booked through next spring. Even old Bill Patterson had become a regular, his American flag now flying proudly at exactly 90 degrees over our tool. She'd measured it myself this morning," he'd always say with a wink, making everyone laugh. The surprise of the morning came when a familiar Mercedes pulled up. Though this one was silver, not white, Maggie Whitfield stepped out, looking smaller than I remembered, in a simple grey suit. She'd been released early for testifying against Thornton and had written me several letters from prison that I'd never answered. Now she stood at the gate, clearly unsure of her welcome. The crowd went silent, tension crackling in the air. This was the woman who terrorized them all, who destroyed gardens and dreams with equal cruelty. But I remembered something Mum used to say about forgiveness being more for yourself than the person who wronged you. I walked over slowly, very aware of everyone watching. "Maggie," I said simply. She looked up and I saw tears in her eyes. "I came to apologize," she said, her voice barely audible. "Not because I expect forgiveness, but because I need to say it. I destroyed something beautiful because I was angry at my own life. Your mother's garden reminded me of everything I'd lost when my husband left everything I'd never have, so I tried to control everything else instead." She held out an envelope. "It's not enough, but it's all I have left after the lawyer's $20. Maybe it can help buy more plants." I looked at the envelope, then at her face. The mighty HOA president who'd made our lives hell was just a broken woman who channeled her pain into hurting others. "I forgive you," I said, and meant it, but I can't. Forget too many people suffered. She nodded, understanding. "I don't expect to be welcome here. I just wanted you to know that every day in that cell I thought about those tomatoes I crushed. How something so small started something so big. You won because you brought people together. I lost because I drove them apart. She turned to go, but I called after her. "Maggie," she stopped. "The money could help us start a therapy garden for people dealing with loss and anger. Maybe you could volunteer there. Sometimes not as a leader, just as someone learning to grow things instead of destroying them." The look of surprised hope on her face was worth all the murmured objections from the crowd. Mum always said the best revenge was a life well lived, and what better life than one that transformed enemies into allies? The rest of the day was a blur of celebration. Tom Bradley had built an information kiosk right next to the famous pole where we'd hung Maggie's Mercedes, now officially designated, the Justice Pole, with a bronze plaque telling the story, "Still the best piece of performance art I've ever created," he said, proudly, making tourists pose for pictures with it. Dorothy Thompson cut the ribbon on the Heritage Centre, where photos and documents told the 30-year history of the community's fight against developers. "Your mother started this resistance. She told the crowd her son finished it. But all of you made it possible." Richard Thornton was serving 15 years in federal prison, and his testimony had brought down the entire Paradise Corp network. 11 other executives were behind bars, and millions in stolen assets had been returned to communities across 3 states. The little tomato plant that started it all now grew in a place of honor in the greenhouse labeled Hope. In my mother's handwriting, copied from one of her garden journals, as the sun set on our celebration, I found myself alone for a moment by Mum's memorial garden. The evening light caught the leaves of the tomato plants, making them glow like green gold in my pocket. Was a letter I'd received that morning from a family in Michigan whose community garden had been saved because of our lawsuit setting precedent. They'd sent tomato seeds from their own heritage plants, continuing the cycle of growth and resistance. "You did it, Mum," I whispered to the garden. "You taught me that a tomato garden is enough to make a home. Turns out it's enough to save one too." Sarah found me there as darkness fell, the celebration winding down behind us. 12 people came today," she said softly. "Every one of them has a story about standing up to bullies because of what you did." I shook my head. "What we did, all of us," she smiled. "The resistance has a website now. Communities all over are using our model to fight back against corrupt HOAs and predatory developers. Someone even made T-shirts with tomatoes on them that say, 'Grow Justice.' Next month, we're hosting the first National Community Garden Defense Summit. Representatives from 47 communities are coming to learn our strategies. A documentary filmmaker wants to tell our story. 3 law schools are using our case in their property law curriculum. But the best part is the kids program every Saturday. Children who've never seen food grow from seed, harvest their own vegetables. Last week, a little girl named Maria picked her first tomato and bit into it right there in the garden. The wonder on her face reminded me why we fought so hard. This isn't just about land or laws, it's about keeping the connection between people and the earth that feeds them the connection. Developers like Thornton try to break for profit as we walked back toward the lights and laughter. I stopped to touch the justice pole one more time. 15 FT tall and still standing, strong, a monument to the day, regular. People said enough and fought back with creativity instead of cruelty. The Mercedes was long gone, but the story lived on, growing bigger with each telling. Dorothy was right. The sweetest victories really do grow from the deepest pain every morning. Now I water that surviving tomato plant. It's grown into the biggest, healthiest plant in the greenhouse, producing fruit that we give away free to anyone who needs it. Because that's what Mum taught me, what this whole crazy journey reinforced. You can destroy gardens, but you can't kill the spirit that plants them. And sometimes when the powerful go too far, All it takes is one person saying no more to start a revolution, even if that revolution begins with nothing more than a tomato seedling. And the courage to hang a Mercedes from a pole if you've survived your own HOA nightmare. Drop your story in the comments below. Let's keep building this resistance together.